Hi, this is Dr. Ali Caliendo from Foster Kinship and the Kinship Training Institute. And today I want to have a short conversation about kinship disruption. When I say kinship disruption, what I'm talking about and referring to are the times when the Department of Family Services has asked a kinship family to step up for a child in foster care. And then at some point along the way, that family says that they cannot do it anymore. And the child goes into foster care with a traditional foster parent, or maybe ends up at Child Haven, or might go into a different kinship foster home. So, what are the reasons behind this disruption, and why are kinship families disrupting at what seems like a very high rate? There are actually several things that contribute to the kinship disruption rate. And I want to talk about them now and give you some advice about how to better assess a kinship family for long term stability and to know when to intervene and how when you're seeing that there may be some issues in the kinship placement stability. So, the first thing to know is that most of these kinship placements that are made by the Department of Family Services happen in a moment of crisis for the caregiver. They are maybe getting a call, maybe even in the middle of the night, that a child that they're related to or that they know is at Child Haven or at risk of entering the foster care system. And if they don't come and take the child right now and act as that placement option for the child, that child might end up with strangers or might end up in foster care. When I say in foster care, what that means to kinship families is in a stranger's home. So it's a very scary time for families, and oftentimes their first instinct is to say yes, maybe without asking the questions that they need to ask to know if they can do the actual work of parenting a child who's experienced trauma. Especially for our grandparents, of course, they say yes. Because oftentimes this is their grandchildren, and the thought of their grandchildren entering foster care is very alarming, and they will do anything to prevent that. So families are saying yes in crisis and out of love, but without having all of the information that they need to understand what is it going to take to parent a child who's experienced trauma over the long term. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is that families are often misinformed or perhaps not hearing what is really going on. So, families who become involved with the foster care system for the first time, it's an overwhelming process that is almost like a black box of confusion. They don't really understand what's happening. And they think potentially by stepping up, they're preventing some of the legal processes of foster care from stopping, which oftentimes is not the case. So, what we hear at Foster Kinship, unfortunately, quite frequently, is that the kinship family was told by their caseworker who originally placed or investigated that it was going to be a temporary situation. And the caseworker may go so far as to say a couple of days, a couple of weeks. So, when you combine this is my family with it's only going to be for a few weeks, it's a no brainer that families say yes without thinking through long term consequences because they're asked to think short term. What happens is that we see only about 10 to 15 kids, or 10 to 15% of kids, will end up being reunified and going home to their birth parents in that time frame that is promised by the caseworker. Most of the time, by the time a child is entering the foster care system, it takes a little bit longer for kids to go home if they go home at all. So, what happens is a caregiver has heard temporary, has agreed to temporary. And then when the weeks drag on, they start feeling like, well, how am I going to do this now? And by the time they get potentially assigned to a permanency worker or talk to someone at foster kinship and are getting the sort of here's the roadmap of how long the court process can take, it can just be so overwhelming because they agreed to short term that they're thinking, I can't do this. I can't do this. I could have done it if it was short term, but I never signed up for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, forever. And so that becomes a breaking point for many families. What we see is that kinship disruption for Clark County happens within the first 70 days of the placement. So it is those initial conversations that caseworkers are having that are so critical to set expectations and to look for families that may be able to care for a child over the longer term if that reunification doesn't happen as fast as potentially we all hope it will. because there is a lot of trauma that happens with disruption, and it's costly, and it hurts everybody. And we'd like to see it reduced. So those are some of the reasons. We've also, unfortunately, heard caseworkers are telling families directly, if you can't do it, just take the child back to child haven, which is counter to everything we know about transitions and stability. And I think runs counter just to the overall narrative of the department, which is that's not what we want to do. We don't want kids at child haven. And so we really need to start thinking about how we can help families understand all the resources available to them at the time of placement, while setting expectations that, well, it might be great if this child could go home right away. Are you equipped to care for them if that doesn't happen? Because in many of these cases, it might be as long as 18 months to 2 years before a decision is made if the child is able to go home. Having those conversations at the beginning may reduce the number of kinship families who say yes, but it should increase the number of families who say yes, who are able to do it over the long term. Just a few things to keep in mind. Another reason that kinship families disrupt, and they disrupt angrily, they are frustrated. We see this all the time. It's because they were explicitly told that there were going to be resources available to them that are not available to them. They were told they could go and get the food stamps that the kids were currently getting in the parents' home. They were told that they'll qualify for cash assistance. They're told they can get licensed as a foster parent. In reality, all of those processes are managed by different departments, and food stamps and child-only TANF are managed by the Division of Welfare. Very strict guidelines on household income and what it takes to qualify. And just because a child is coming from a home that has food stamps does not mean that those food stamps follow the child. They are household based. And so we see a lot of families who say yes, knowing that they can go ahead and get SNAP and cash assistance, and they're going to get licensed. And when it comes down to it, they don't qualify for SNAP because they make too much money. They have too much in the bank, and they don't qualify for child-only TANF. And in fact, they're not able to get licensed because there's something going on either in their home or their background that is going to prevent them from being licensed as a foster parent. When you're told that you can get help, and then you are told no by the agencies that are providing that help, is very, very difficult to maintain your ability to keep caring for children. And families oftentimes get frustrated and think, I can't do this. I've drained my savings. I'm about to lose my job. My own kids are at risk. I'm not able to feed this child, clothe this child, and I don't see help on the horizon. I can't do it. And we see this all the time. And what we'd like to see at Foster Kinship are families told exactly what they qualify for and when, and not be given information that won't apply to them, because there's nothing worse than being told you will get something and not getting it. It is discouraging and demoralizing. What we'd prefer is to say, you may qualify for this and you may not, or you won't qualify for this. Do you still want to go forward? And by doing that, again, we may be reducing the number of families that step up immediately, because they'll be able to honestly say, I can't do this without help. And that's okay too, because ultimately those who say yes, who really can't do it, end up not doing it. And those kids are then going from multiple places, which adds to trauma. The longer term reasons that families disrupt, so if they get past that 70 days and they have the resources that they need, and they have the information they need, now we're talking about some of the same reasons that we see foster parents disrupt as well. And that comes down to the child's behavior and not being able to get help for it. It's a very, very common, and we are lacking in mental health resources. And so it should come as no surprise that the things that kinship families are complaining about are the same things that foster and adoptive families are complaining about, which is we all desperately need more services to manage the behaviors of the kids in our home. It's all stemming from a variety of trauma and brain differences that come from the reasons why kids can't be with their parents. There aren't enough resources in Clark County, and that's something we can advocate for. But those reasons for disruption are really based on getting the child the services that the child needs, and supporting that family emotionally, that they are not alone. They are not the only ones dealing with this. There are so many of us out here that want to support each other, parenting these children who have come from hard places and deserve support. The final reason that we see families disrupt would be difficulty navigating birth-parent partnership. So these are families that especially for kinship families, may have a really long history of pre-existing relationship with the birth parents. And it was a very difficult for them to come to a place potentially of partnering and reunification because they have a long history with the family. And caseworkers oftentimes are not as sensitive, to be very blunt, as needed to understand kinship family dynamics. So just a few examples for you. If you're dealing with a kinship family and it's a maternal grandmother, you may be more likely to deal with issues around codependence with the grandmother and the daughter than you would be with a paternal grandmother. And in those families, you may be dealing with issues of maybe a denial about their son's behavior. When you're dealing with aunts who have grown up with their siblings and are just maybe sick of it, sick of the drama, sick of everything they've done for their family, they're carrying a load, they may be angry. Aunts tend to be a lot angrier. And when you're dealing with fictive kin, so those who have a family like Ty, you might find that they don't fully understand the need to reunify, and you need to address some of the family systems dynamics the same way you would address a traditional foster parent, because they're coming from a different point of view. So treating kinship families all the same is never going to work. Looking at the actual dynamics of the family system will really support birth-parent partnership, and it's an important piece of the puzzle because a lot of times kinship families just can't handle and manage those relationships without our help. These are just some tips that we have seen over the decade that we work with kinship families. About 13,000 children have come through our doors, and we want to see fewer children in placements, kinship placements that disrupt. And so there's these things that we can do. Here's what we can all do. Understand what resources are available to kinship families and accurately tell them about it at the right time. So at Foster Kinship, one of our main goals is accurate information at the right time. Let the family make the best decision for their family. No more misinformation. Don't promise families that things are going to be temporary. Don't promise families that they can get resources. Put everything in a very carefully worded way so that, hey, this might be longer than a few days and you may not qualify for this financial help. What do you need as far as support to be able to do this, whether it be short-term or long-term? Who else do you know in your family system that might be able to help this child? These are the questions that we can ask so that we're not seeing these quick disruptions within the first 70 days. Certainly stop telling families it's okay to take kids back to child haven, because I do think that runs counter to everything that we want for kids, which is not to end up at child haven and to be sort of bounced around after they already are removed from their family, their parents. And finally, knowing that families need help get accessing mental health resources for kids' behavior, connecting them to the support that exists, just the peer support network, and understanding that kinship family dynamics and family systems play a huge role in how families can maintain placement of children is going to only benefit the work that you do with families and help all of the kids stay in the best kinship family placement as long as possible. I hope this helps. At Foster Kinship, we are always open to talking about this. And we do a lot of research onto what works for kinship families and what we see isn't working. And so we just wanted to share this to hopefully give you some encouragement that kinship families are fabulous, fabulous resources, and they will be a better partner for all of us in the community if we're being completely honest about what they're stepping into, how long it might take, what their financial and legal options are, and what resources are available for their family. Thanks so much. Have a great day.